And now my slides are not advancing. Oh, there we go. Okay, so why stay socially connected and mentally fit now? As Justin said at the beginning, we don't know where we are in this COVID pandemic. It may last a lot longer. It may be drawn out. At the beginning, we were in a very acute crisis that was very scary. And the focus of a lot of the work that Deborah and I were doing in these kinds of talks was much more, and with our staff at the hospital was much more anxiety related. But now, there is anxiety, but places are opening up and it's kind of this drawn out quarantine fatigue with anxiety and irritability thrown in there, and other kinds of issues like loneliness, etc. But as places are opening up, you all and we all need to make our own rules for what our risk tolerance will be. And one stressful thing is that our risk tolerance might not be the same as the same risk tolerance of people that you're close to or just people that are out there. So that's, one of these things that we have to kind of cope with. Looking at the graph right here, also epidemiologists predict that we had that first wave, but that a second wave may be coming. And we are kind of seeing that in Florida with loosening of restrictions and having the most reported new cases in the past 3 days. So on the one hand, okay, great, restrictions are loosened. On the other hand, we need to be careful of our risk tolerance. And within that, there's this issue of, there may be a wave of urgent non-COVID issues that come up or chronic disease. And then the one that we're really talking about today that can really affect people is the mental health wave, which, involves things like depression, post-traumatic stress, burnout, economic issues that we might be facing, and trying to cope with these kinds of things as it continues. And the thing is that within our community of sexual and gender minority individuals, we already need to be resilient. So this is, adding to that background of, there's the regular stressors that, everyone's going through, the family stressors, whatever it is, but our particular stressors are adding on to that backdrop of, let's say it's homophobia, transphobia, having to still deal with the family stressors, etc. And then also within our community, individuals that are of color or other, cultures are dealing with this intersectionality of sexual gender minority stress intersecting with the effects of real racism in the country right now. So it's not just COVID, it's racism, it's xenophobia, it's just not a great time. So back to this issue of anxiety. So one thing to remember is that anxiety is something that is very natural and is there for a reason. So for example, on the left-hand side of the screen, if you are stressed or anxious because a car is coming at you, your body needs to mobilize really quickly and not think things through. But the thing that needs to mobilize are like your pupils dilate, your lungs develop deep breathing, so oxygen goes where it needs to go. It's not focusing on bowel movements or other kinds of stomach things. It's focusing on heart beating faster, vessels constricting, and doing everything possible to get out of the way when the car is coming at you and jump, because you don't think it through. You need to just do it, and that's why you have anxiety. And then the other thing about anxiety, or let's say pressure or stress, which is related to anxiety, is that there's also kind of an optimal level that, like during the day, you don't want to be too bored, because if you have no pressure, you might be bored or kind of like not doing anything or, just sitting around. But there's that optimal level of pressure that, you might feel comfortable, your performance might be optimized. And what we don't want to do is get to this other part for an extended period of time where you have too much anxiety and stress and you have strain, burnout, or, more severe mental health problems. So as I was saying, related to that fight or flight mechanism, that your brain under typical conditions, when it's faced with something, will observe, it will input, it will interpret, it will process, it will evaluate options, it will plan, and it will act. But when you have that alarm system express route with anxiety, it's more like observe, interpret, danger, act, react, fight or flight. And again, that's a fine thing to do right away in an acute stressor like a car coming at you or being attacked. But in the situation of an extended period of time, we don't want to go to chronic unhealthy stress from acute stress. We want to be resilient to that and stay mentally fit. So what does resilience actually mean? Resilience means adapting well in the face of adversity or stress. It doesn't mean that you're not facing the adversity stress. It's meanings that you're adapting well to it. It takes time. And in situations like this, like COVID, like, again, I mean, racism and dealing with all kinds of things that are happening, when you're bombarded with chronic stress and you need to be resilient, to do it, you have to be very, very intentional. Oops. So this word intentional, what I mean is you have to actually plan to do the things that normally you would do when you're not stressed, like the way the brain was reacting in that slide that I just showed. But instead, like really making sure that you're doing these activities to be resilient and staying mentally fit. And that will help you avoid burnout. It'll help you avoid prevention fatigue, which will be safer for you and others in your circle. And it also means maybe not always seeing people in the normal way, which kind of sucks because, as I'll get to, we are social humans. And again, particularly with sexual and gender minorities, I think the issue is, a lot of times we have to do intentional things just to be around people like us versus having to, just going to the store, going out and about, we have to kind of have chosen families that we spend time with sometimes, or have different ways of meeting, friends or sexual partners and those kinds of things. And it's a lot harder when we have to also be quarantining. So how do you stay fit during all this? There's three main things which I will try to go over in not too much time so that we can get to your questions. And that reminds me to please, everyone, just come up with a question and type one in, because whatever your favorite question is, we definitely want to hear it. But the three ways of staying mentally fit are unplug and anchor. So, creative social support, pleasurable activities, combat excessive negative thinking. I'm going to, again, go into a bunch of these things, a little bit more detail. Charging up. So, eating well, taking care of sleep, exercise, again, intentionally. These are things that you might normally do when you're not under stress. And meditation and relaxation, which we'll do towards the end of this. And also finding purpose and growth can be meaningful. So, giving back in some way, using effective problem solving, and finding opportunities for self-discovery during this time. In terms of social support, it's important to be intentional about whatever type of social support you need. So it's not just there's not just one kind of social support that everybody benefits from, but also, think about having someone that you can have to share your needs, have emotional support, social connections, having it be reliable, getting reassurance, feeling needed, advice and information, physical assistance, material assistance. These are all different kinds of social support. So take a few minutes to think about what social support is most important to you, and are there ways or people that can get to you that type of social support. I did want to just say a little bit about COVID-19 prevention and HIV STI prevention, and that is, the area that I work in. My research studies and some of the projects that we work on are really trying to find innovative ways to help curb the HIV epidemic. And a big part of that is with men who have sex with men. We help people kind of come up with, in a non-judgmental way, what is your sexual comfort zone? So coming up with rules or limits that, you've defined for yourself, and then looking at the type of sex that turns you on and coming up with a comfort zone that what will you do and what will you not do, and what pushes you to go outside of that comfort zone and what helps you stay within it. That's a part of the counseling that we do in our projects and programs. And it made me think about applying that a little bit to the pandemic comfort zone, because also, we have our normal pre-pandemic social, sexual, occupational, or family activities. And then we have like these rules or limits that you might define for yourself in regards to what you'll do with respect to social distancing and illness prevention, and coming up also with yourself, what is your comfort zone? And these are things that, again, as we're opening up more, that you should be doing so that you can try to get your social needs met and your, staying mentally fit and socially connected, as I was saying, but doing it in a way that you are being intentional about what you feel like is your risk limit and what might not be your risk limit. It's important to stay mentally fit by making sure that you have pleasant activities every day. So when there's a lot of bad stuff happening, try to take a break from it, whether it's briefly listening to music, whether it's escaping into TV, movies, or books, whether it's hobbies that you can do in your home or any kind of social networking, but taking breaks from this backdrop of total bad things and bad news on the news constantly, that taking a break from it and trying to make sure that every day you are doing something that you enjoy. And that's also a treatment of depression, believe it or not. Like, one treatment of people with clinical major depression is really to help people through this process called behavioral activation slowly learn to enjoy events that they used to enjoy and do them more and more. And that ends up helping your mood, even if you start off doing the things that you used to enjoy and not enjoying it as much at the beginning because you're depressed, but like making sure that you do it is a very valid treatment of depression, and is something that you can do to help staying, like we said, mentally fit during this time. Another thing is trying to combat negative thinking. So, with all the stuff that's happening, it's easy to get into just excessive negative thinking. And one way to deal with that is, once you notice it, to try to slow down your thinking and ask yourself, if you're beating yourself up about something or you're trying to counsel yourself, what would you say to a friend? Or what is the evidence for this thought? And coming to this in this graph here, we have like reasonable mind, which might be, the perfectly reasonable thing that you would do in a situation, and emotional mind, which would be like, when someone really pisses you off and you want to scream at them, or, you're really depressed and you want to just blow everything off, or you're really anxious and you want to just completely hide, kind of balancing those things with the reasonable mind and coming to the middle. So everything is valid. Your emotions, whatever you're experiencing with this pandemic, with what's going on with race relations, with everything, however you're reacting, like, that's how you're reacting. You can't control that. That's fine. It's normal. But I'm saying, try to find the middle of the reasonable mind and the wise, which is the wise mind, and trying to do that through, things like, what would you say to a friend, or what's the evidence, and slowing down your thinking. Again, back to that issue of having things be as intentional as possible. These are ways to recharge and unplug. So we mentioned mindfulness. There's relaxation, deep breathing, exercise, yoga. All of these things are amazing for helping you stay in somewhat of a better mood during this time. And then I say unplugging. So we talk about, like, at some point you need to limit your consumption of the news, or if you're working, take breaks. But with the news, it's like, at some point, it's just, you're not really getting new information. You're just hearing more people talk about all the bad stuff, and it's not helping in any way. It's just kind of like ruminating about awful things. So, take some breaks from that as well. And within that, we've all heard the serenity prayer, serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So it really is this issue of balancing how you cope, and within whatever is going on, balancing the problem solving side, which is kind of like that rational thinking I was just talking about, with accepting and soothing yourself about the things that and being non-judgmental to yourself about the things that you can't change, that trying to know that difference. This is the last of kind of the didactic slides, but I just talk a little bit about trying to apply a strength-based approach to this resilience to all the stuff that's going on. And I write at the top, like, no, this is not what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I think that phrase can be helpful to some people, and other people it really isn't helpful, because it would be much better to have the bad thing not have happened. I mean, if I don't know, living through cancer, for example, like, I may have grown from it, but I would be much happier if it never happened. So in some ways, maybe, let's say I'm a little stronger, but in other ways, like, I think it would have, I would, if it were up to me, I would probably take a pass. So, so in what I'm saying here is, we have kind of our own strengths related to sexual gender minority issues that we may have overcome, our individual strengths, we have strengths in the community, and we have our stressors, but let's try to balance it and think, like, who do I want to be during COVID-19? Do you want to be in the fear zone? Do you want to be in the learning zone? Or do you want to be in the growth zone? And the growth zone is more of that, like, I think of others and how to help them. I make my talents available to others. I live in the present and focus on the future. That's a little bit of a tenet of mindfulness. I'm empathetic with myself and others. I thank and appreciate others. I keep an emotional state and try to spread hope, look for new ways to adapt to changes, and practice quietude, patience, relationships, and creativity versus, kind of this fear zone. And there's also examples here of the learning zone as well. So thinking about who do you want to be during all of this stuff that's happening. I have some resources on this page here. We can update and send out some other things to people that are listening in, but our website for Charm is constantly being curated and updated for mental health and related resources local to Miami. The Mass General Hospital, where I used to work, has a really great curated website for mental health resources during COVID. Our lab, we have our specific research lab, Charm is the center. Within that, my group that does work with men who have sex with men, we're doing a study now on stimulant dependence and HIV risk. So if that applies to you, or if it applies to anyone that you know, that one you may be eligible for free counseling. And it actually is that behavioral activation, which I was talking about before. And then there's a bunch of mobile apps out there, one of which is called COVID Coach, which is really great. And, but there's other apps out there as well that you can look at to kind of practice some of the things that we mentioned. So that is it on the part where I'm just talking without audience participation. I'm going to turn it over to Deborah, who is going to curate your questions. And we have some questions from before that we can also utilize. But again, please, if you're thinking of anything at all that you think will be relevant to helping yourself or others, that a clinical psychologist might be useful for, please type them in.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. That was, it's always very interesting to hear you speak. I appreciate everything you had to say. So while you were talking, we actually did have some questions, and so what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about those questions, and then maybe raise some other questions and things that you might not have thought about. But I want to start by just asking that as you're listening to Steve and you're asking yourself, you know, do I buy into what he's saying? Am I really able to do this? I want you to just remember that the beginning of the whole process is to be aware of your emotions as they come up. And to remind yourself that whatever you're feeling, as Steve said, you know, it's normal to feel that way. And it's valid to feel that way. Sometimes we spend a lot of time telling ourselves that we shouldn't be allowed to feel the way we feel, but that is really not fair. So remember that it's okay, it's normal. You're not alone. Other people are feeling the same way, and we are all finding our way through. There's nobody who has the answer. What we have is the, you know, perhaps a little bit of guidance to bring you in the direction of finding a solution that's going to work for you. So the first question I wanted to address was one that I really liked immediately, and it was talking about telehealth and working on telehealth and working with a team. But because you're working on the phone, because maybe you're using a platform like Zoom, you're disconnected from people and you don't have a sense of a team, and your boss feels like a bully, right? So what can you do? Well, let's just step back for a minute and say, when we're on the phone, we say things sometimes that we wouldn't say if we were actually talking to someone face to face. Have you noticed that? And sometimes when we're emailing, we email things, or even texting. We email things or text things very quickly that we wouldn't normally do. So perhaps one of the things that's happening for you is that your boss, who maybe has a little bit of a control problem, is because that your boss is also now on this platform that's unusual for everybody. Your boss may be a little more abrasive, a little more difficult. And normally, where we would normally reach out to other people for social support, all we have is these little boxes, right? The little boxes that you're looking at, the little boxes that I'm looking at, and we feel kind of disconnected. So what can you do? How can you deal with that? Well, you can ask yourself, what's going on with your boss? Now, I know you probably want to say, well, what about me? But this helps, really. So what do you think is going on with your boss? Maybe your boss is feeling stressed out. Maybe your boss is feeling like they have lost control over whatever's going on. They've lost control of their team. They've lost control of their employees. And maybe they're really struggling, and that comes out as sort of a bullying manner. The next question would be, what could you do that might influence the way that your boss is behaving? Now, I don't know many people who like to criticize their bosses. That's kind of a dangerous activity. But it is okay to give a little bit of feedback that's gentle, not while your boss is bullying or angry, but take a moment and maybe wait a little while and then move in and provide a little bit of feedback. As a boss, I will tell you, I'm very sensitive to that kind of feedback from other people. And, you know, if someone were to approach me when I was steamed up, it probably would not go well. But if you wait for the moment and, you know, pausing, reflecting, thinking about what you want to say, choosing your moment. The other thing to think about is choosing your battle, right? So ask yourself, is this the thing that you want to get into it with your boss about? So slow down a little bit and maybe do some of the self-focused things that Steve has been talking about, you know, about relaxation or yoga, things that help you feel calm after those very difficult phone calls. So that's a long answer, but
Yeah.
it's very dear to my heart. You want to say?
I would like to add to it a little bit, since we're trying to do the talk show thing anyway, where we, you know, go through, we were kind of thinking, well, before we came up with this, of that car talk, which is, you know, people call in and stuff. But gosh, you know, the issue with, I've had so many clients where so much therapy is spent talking about how to deal with their boss. It can be such a stressful thing, even when there's no COVID and there's no, you know, racism happening, that well, probably the whole time racism was happening, but not at the level of the protests and, you know, deaths that we've been seeing lately. But, you know, it can be such a distressing relationship at times, and it pushes people's buttons, and it a lot of times will bring up family issues that you've had in your life. It and and just like the stuff that that I was talking about in this and that Deborah was talking about, but taking a step back and like the pick your battle thing, and we say strike while the iron's cold. Like, don't do it when it's all heated and heated up. But the thing about like asking yourself, okay, what's the best thing for me in this situation as to how I'm going to react? And a lot of times it's not to like threaten to quit and scream and yell and do all that stuff that you might be really tempted to do, but instead it's to do like what Deborah was saying. It's like, okay, pick the right battle, pick the right time. Email things always sound worse than they do in person, etc. And try to just like navigate it the best that you can, trying to step back from it.
Yeah, I must confess, this is a topic that gets brought up pretty frequently. How do we deal with people in this kind of format, this sort of platform? And it's very difficult. And people who are sort of abrasive and bullying, this is...
They get worse. They get worse. Right?
Yeah. So who can we focus on, right? Who can we change? Can we change the boss, or can we change ourselves? No. I hate to say this, but we're kind of sliding back to the serenity prayer, which is, can I change my reaction to my boss, or can I change my boss? I think probably the former. So we want to think about what Steve was talking about in terms of saying, how can I change how I'm responding to this? Let me come to another question, and this is also an excellent question. I must confess, I said this myself a couple of days ago. How do we help in the Black Lives Matter cause when we're afraid of going to a protest because we're practicing social distancing and we don't want to be in a big crowd? How can we contribute to this really important time in our history, in our lives? How can we be active when we can't, be close up with other people? I must confess, I have looked at this very closely, and I notice a lot of people protesting are wearing masks. I notice a lot of the protests, people are maintaining a distance between each other, but not all the time. And Miami is one of them. We seem a little bit more clustered together at times. But I think that, what Steve was saying earlier about setting your risk limit is really important. And if your risk limit says, I don't want to be in a big crowd, what can you do to support what you believe in? So I will give you a page out of my own book, which is that I have a zero tolerance for racism. And so whenever I hear anything that smacks of racism, I make sure that everyone in the room knows. And I am never silent. So I want to encourage you to think about sharing your view on whatever social platform that you use, so that you can let people know exactly what your belief is. I don't know. What do you think, Steve?
I totally agree. And I agree with, you have to set your limits and then feel okay with yourself about it. So it's like, it's the non-judgmental component of some of the things that we were talking about. But, there's always more to do, and there's always like, you're doing as much as you can, and you have to balance those two things that are happening. And in terms of, I certainly can't be an expert in what is best to help the cause if you don't want to, let's say, go out and protest. But another thing is just to try to be an active listener and a consumer of good information from individuals that are affected by it. So a couple examples are in academics. I have a colleague who's African American that is sending me materials, and one of was like, 10 things that you can do to support diversity and I forget exactly, but it was like something like that, within the academic settings, and ways to try to work on that. And we're going to bring that to our department. Um, Another thing is like listening, like, I haven't really talked to Deborah, you about this. We're going to talk about it tomorrow during our meeting, but our community advisory board is mostly people that are affected or that are living with HIV, and many of whom are African American and or Black, Caribbean, and every single person of color in that room shared really devastating stories regarding racism, mostly within the past couple months, but that have happened and really affected their lives. So I say, like, being open and listening and trying to find that's the only thing I can say is, look within what you can do locally, and what you can do, what people that are close to you might say, or look at good sources online and try to figure out, what you can do within your limits.
So the next question is kind of along the same lines, and it's about that darn serenity prayer. So the question is this, and it's a good one. How do you know what you can change and what you can't change? So this is a great question. So number one, think of yourself and another person. Can you change that other person? Let's say they thought it was raining outside and you thought it was just drizzle. And you could have quite a long conversation about it, but at the end of the day, could you change their mind if they were convinced it was raining? No, you could not. So what you might want to think now is that the only thing that you can really change is you, right? You are the only thing that can change. And even changing ourselves, we're not so good at that. It's pretty challenging to change something about yourself. So what's happening for us is that a lot of the time we are saying to ourselves, everything has changed for me and I've got to find my way through it. I've got to figure out how to deal with all of these changes. But what we really want is we really want things to change to suit us. And the truth of it is that we have to change. We are the only thing that we can really be effective in changing. And it's very challenging. So how could you, if this person says, is there a set of questions I could ask, right? So I used to live in Germany and they had one technique, I thought it was a good one. And it was, mach deine Augen zu und dann siehst du, was dich gehört. So here it is in English, close your eyes and you'll see what you can take control of. Right? So that's my set of questions. Do you have anything you want to add, Steve?
No, I mean, I think that's pretty good. It's just that two-way path, and
Yeah.
It isn't always totally clear. And I do think, the other talk that we used to do related to this at the beginning was called Finding the Middle. And when I say finding the middle, what I mean is like not everything's so black and white. Mm-hmm. And another kind of tenet of the type of therapy that I practice, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, is this issue of like dialogue. I'm getting a little I'm getting too academic here, but the issue of like struggling with the middle ground of I'm doing the best that I can given the circumstances, and there's always going to be more to do. Mm-hmm. Living with both of those two exact realities is the way life is without COVID, without racism, without anything. I mean, those things are always, those two tenets, you always have to find that middle ground between those two things. And so now we need to do that even more. Mm-hmm. And it's just trying to sit with it and be non-judgmental to yourself and just be okay with the fact that there is always going to be more to do and that you're doing the most that you can. And, if tomorrow you can do more, great. But if not, we're just trying to like get through this period of time, and hopefully things will get better in a few months, and then a few months after that,
But I think it's this issue of change. Can we change? What can we change? I mean, I'm a big believer in, one person making a difference, and
Yeah.
a lot of people think that's silly. But I'm a believer in that. But I think that at some point, as you say, we have to accept what happens. We do what we need to do. We do our best, and then we have to let go. Let me go to the next question
All
here.
right, one more thing that I just want to add, because we are doing this for SAVE, and SAVE
Okay.
endorses political candidates, and
Okay.
is so important with this whole thing too. So, I mean, one thing that you don't need to like go out into the streets for is like talk to Justin about ways to volunteer for SAVE from your house, and think about that level of change as well, or just getting involved on the political side.
Yeah, yeah. Those of us who get on the phone and badger people on the phone can tell you there's still work to be done. Okay, so here's somebody that's talking about the fact that we seem to be splitting into two societies. And this is something that Steve and I have talked about a lot. So we have one group of people that says they're comfortable going out and reopening. Isn't it time for us to move on and reopen? Let's, I hear people say, this has gone on long enough, hasn't it? And then there are other people who don't feel comfortable doing that. And those people are really grappling with what do we do when some people are going out without a mask, really kind of not paying any attention to, the fact that we're all vulnerable. And so, there's some people that are not so cavalier. The writer writes this word cavalier. So there's some of us who are not so cavalier about vulnerability to infection, or vulnerability for their family members, or vulnerability for their friends. And some people are, taking responsibility and, and accepting that they don't want to take that risk because intellectually they know it's not a good idea. But it's hard for those of us, and maybe Steve is one of those people too, who are social people, right? We like to talk, and we like other people's company, and this is very difficult. So I want to say, what can we do? How can the people who are, as Tony Fauci would say, hunkering down at home, deal with the people who are, cruising around without a mask, at the mall, for example, or on the airplane. I understand people are getting on the plane without a mask. So what can we do? How can we manage that? Steve, do you want to say something, or shall I just continue?
I mean, I just think that there's always going to be some risk, and there's always going to be people that aren't at the same level of your personal risks, and it is really tough as we start to open up, and you may be forced to go to a store and to get groceries or to get whatever you want to get, and walk by people that are not wearing masks even though they're supposed to. And it's very frustrating, because the mask wearing is helpful if you're the one wearing the mask. It's helpful to you to be wearing the mask, but even more so, it's helpful in case you are in that transmissibility zone where there's a couple days before you start to have symptoms of COVID. And it seems like a lot of the transmissions are coming from that period of people. So having a mask, if you are the transmitter, the person with the virus but no symptoms, is better than being the trying to protect yourself. It's more of doing something for others to wear the mask in some ways. So I don't know. I think of it as like, we talked about, Deborah and I, we talked about the road rage, the issue of road rage. Like if I'm out there in my car, I had this client that was really affected by road rage. Like when he would drive and a driver would piss him off, like he would just get out of the car and start fights with people and punch the windows and all this stuff. And, through therapy, like we ended up kind of talking a lot and helping him come to the realization that unfortunately those people are always going to be there. And you can't, beat up or fight or scream at or swear or flick off every single person that cuts you off, because there's still going to be the same percentage of the population that are bad drivers or that are horrible, asshole drivers or whatever. So, it's what is it best for you? And, there is always going to be risk when you drive a car, but, you have to kind of like figure out what is within your limits and how do you manage it. And, if you're going to try to go out twice a week instead of every day, that's still mitigating your risk than it would be if you went out every day or, however many times. So, you can't treat it cavalierly, but think about what's going to be, helpful to you. And I think it's tough because we're not really getting consistent messages from, the CDC or the government right now. And another reason to, look at SAVE and think about who they endorse and stuff. But it's a time where you have to use the skills that we talked about to try to manage your emotions and do the best that you can during the situation is all I can really say.
I think it's important for us to recognize too that there's a group of people, and they might be called the group of people who don't use a mask, but they might also be called the group of people who are in denial. And a lot of us have struggled with that group as well. The people who said, why do I have to do this? I don't want to have to do this. And part of the rejection of using a mask or maintaining social distance is saying, I'm not vulnerable and I can't handle being vulnerable. So we have to recognize at the same time as we understand the frustration we're experiencing, and maybe we get angry, right? Maybe we get angry. And we get angry for a variety of reasons, but maybe part of our anger is about why is this person like ignoring what I know is correct? And maybe they're avoiding the rules because they don't want to deal with the reality of it. And maybe they're deep down afraid that if they were able to really accept what was going on, the fear would be immobilizing. Another thing that I just want to mention is the whole issue of anger. Steve brought up road rage. I also have had some interesting clients with road rage. I'm glad they never came at me. I had a woman told me she pulled someone out of their truck and beat him on the ground. But I think that anger that we're experiencing is happening a lot. That we have been confined. We're inside. People are angry at a boss that they can't see or they can't, touch. They're angry at a spouse or a partner or, a family member that they're around all the time. They're angry that they're constrained, so I think that we're seeing, as well, and this is not a surprise for anyone, I'm sure, I think we're seeing that people are experiencing a lot of anger in general, and it's that frustration and it's that desire to fight back, because I think that the whole experience with COVID, with the virus, has made us feel helpless. And when we get helpless, we get angry and we want to fight, so we're really, it's an invisible enemy that we're got all this anger towards. And because there's nothing that we can fight against, we tend to fight against each other. We have time for one more question, if anyone would like to ask another one, or I can pose another one, if we would like to do that. I'd like to talk for a moment about sleeping. I think that I've heard a lot of people talk about how difficult sleep is. We're not getting quite the same amount of exercise as we were getting before. And maybe we're not eating as well as we used to. Maybe we're feeling cooped up and we get into the bed and we start to ruminate, as Steve was saying, our thoughts are going around and around and around. And what can we do? And there's some really good strategies for helping us sleep. And I'll give you a couple. One is to turn off your computer or your cell phone an hour before you go to bed so that you're not looking at that bright screen. Another one is to be careful not to eat a lot late in the evening. Another one is to monitor your coffee. I noticed when we first started the quarantine, I was drinking an awful lot of coffee. It was really quite something. And then another is that when you go to bed, if you don't fall asleep, get up again, right? Don't, after about 20 minutes, it's time to get up and say, I'm going to do something else until I'm actually sleepy. Do you want to add anything? You've got like a couple of minutes.
No, these are all, these tips are called sleep hygiene. And there's, if you also search that on the web, you'll find a lot of tips like what Deborah just mentioned, but you can search the word sleep hygiene and they're really good for that. And for all the things like, if you have like really bad insomnia, or for any of the things that we've been talking about, like if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling anxious and it's going, it's affecting you like, most of the day, let's say, or more of the time that you're awake than not, or interfering in your life, having a mental health concern like that is not a weakness. A lot of people consider it a weak, to themselves, feel that that's a weakness and don't want to get help for it. But it's as important to take care of that. In fact, it affects quality of life in some ways as much, sometimes more than physical illness does. And it's just really important to try to get help for mental health issues if you're having them. And you can always go to our website, charm.miami.edu, which does have referral sources. There are some places in Miami that are doing telehealth with therapy. And that, I believe, includes Care Resource, as well as our clinic, the Psychological Services Center at the University of Miami, and our psychology department. So, but there's other resources on our website. And I just, mention that because we didn't get a chance to talk about that. But please, if your mental health is not where it needs to be, there are things that can be done to help with it.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I'm going to take 5 minutes now and talk a little bit about mindfulness meditation. And I'll start by saying that mindfulness is a practice that's not only about meditation, it's also about daily life. And what does that mean? Well, it means that mindfulness is the process of becoming aware of yourself and your surroundings, your body, your breathing, your bodily state, your emotions, everything that's going on around you, and being aware of it non-judgmentally. So it's called radical awareness, right? So you are completely aware of who you are and what's going on around you. And the focus of mindfulness is being in the present moment, because the opportunity to be in the present moment means that we're completely processing whatever's going on for us right now. So what I'd like for us to do is just take a few minutes to practice a mindfulness exercise. It's only going to be 4 minutes. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to ask you to sit in a comfortable position, ideally with your back straight. A good way to start is to push your shoulders back and push your tail out and then relax. And you'll find that your whole body will kind of stack up in a nice straight line. As you sit in this relaxed posture, allow yourself to become aware of your breathing. And take a deep breath in, seeing if you can bring the breath in from the region of your belly, the lower belly. And let the breath come all the way up. And then let the breath go out again. And at the bottom, see if you can give it a little push. And then breathe in again. Breathing in. All the way up. And breathing out. And pushing the last of the air out. And now just allowing your body to relax and become aware of your breathing. At first, it may seem a little challenging, and you may want to try to control your breathing. But just allow the breath to come in and out. And as you're in this relaxed state, allow your mind to become aware of the thoughts that might be passing through, and the emotions that might be arising for you. Staying in the present, not judging those emotions, not judging those thoughts, just observing them, paying attention. Allowing those emotions to pass through you like a wave. So coming in and rolling with those emotions and those thoughts, not blocking them or suppressing them, not trying to get rid of them or push them away, not holding on to them, just letting them move through you. And take another breath in, being conscious of yourself right here, right now, relaxed. Breath is deep and even, and being aware of your bodily sensations. You might feel the temperature of your hands. You might feel some tingling in your feet. See if you can bring your attention to the top of your head, the crown of your head. And breathing in. And as you breathe out, letting any stress go out through your fingertips and the soles of your feet. Just allowing your whole body to relax. Allowing yourself to be completely present. Being aware of your breath, the small sounds around you, the weight of your body on the chair. Now we're going to take one last breath in. And as we breathe in, we're going to stretch our arms out, maybe behind you, stretch your back a little bit. And allow your body to relax and just gently let your eyes open, coming back. And take a breath in. So that's the beginning of mindfulness, and it's the end of our hour together. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Justin has sent you a chat that you can send him an email if you want to become an activist and work with SAVE. It's always a great idea. It's never too late to be an activist. Thank you so much, everybody.